Welcome to management. Now, probably the first thing that occurs to you once you've been appointed, after the pride and after the excitement, is the fear. What am I supposed to do? And the truth is that you have just joined the club of people whose job it is to tell other people what to do. But it might be a good time to stop and reflect on what it is that managers do. And I think to make a real sense out of this process, we might be better off if we started talking about what a manager doesn't do. And then we could start talking about what a manager does. And we could finish by talking about how a manager thinks, how a manager is. And that might be the most important lesson of all. Now, this is not the end of this discussion. This is actually the beginning, I think, of a management discussion that will probably carry you through your entire career. And if we're doing this well, then you perhaps might be teaching the next generation of managers after you. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Why don't we just start with what a manager doesn't do? Well, to start with, a manager doesn't get to run anymore. A manager sits in the dugout with the team. A manager doesn't get to bat. The manager is never going to get called to stand over home plate with a bat in hand. It's just not going to happen. A manager doesn't get to field. So there's no magnificent play rendered in the outfield with the manager running and catching that perfect fly. It's not going to happen. A manager doesn't look worried. We were talking about what managers don't do, right? Managers don't look worried in the face of disaster. They keep up the front for the team, and they look calm and imperturbable no matter what. A manager doesn't appear to be doing anything, but they get paid pretty well, so they must be doing something, or more importantly, they must be thinking or being something that's really important to the well-being and the functioning of the team. So it's not about doing. What is it? Well, let's talk about what a manager does. Now, we'd say that the first thing a manager does is that a manager knows or discovers or figures out what has to be done, and then makes sure that it gets done. A manager issues orders. What does that mean? It means that the manager tells people what they need to do. Now, these days, people get a little crazy about that responsibility. Sometimes they go out and they become just a little dictatorial when they become managers. They say, you need to do this, you got to do that, you got to do the other thing. You got to do it by 5 o'clock today. Go. Of course, that goes over like a lead balloon in most creative environments, and people then start to resist management, which is a whole downhill, well, you don't want to be there. On the other hand, a lot of managers say, I don't want to be a dictator, so I'm going to be egalitarian, and I'm going to be friendly, I'm going to be everybody's best buddy, and I'm going to talk about what needs to be done, but I'm not going to issue any orders. Of course, nothing gets done because everybody can legitimately say, well, she never told me to do anything. We just talked about what had to be done. And so there's a lack of an explicit shared direction statement. And in the absence of anybody saying, hey, you must do this today by 5 o'clock, in the absence of that command or that direct order, nothing's going to get done. So somewhere in the no man's land is where management lives. Somewhere south of being a dictator, somewhere north of being everybody's best buddy, there's a place where the manager finds that middle ground about telling people what needs to be done, making sure that they agree to do it, and getting the order issued, getting the order understood, and getting the order complied with. So this is a tough one. It takes a lot of finesse, and that is perhaps one of the big features that we're hoping you're going to develop. Now, what else? Probably the next thing immediately after telling people what to do and telling them to do it, the manager has to help people figure out how to go about doing that. Because A lot of people will nod and say yes and go away, not having the first idea about how they're going to do what they were just asked to do. And the manager is the person who has to say, okay, now you know what I want you to do. And you know my expectation for how it's going to look when it's finished. And you know the time that we have to do it in. Yes, that's good. Do you know how you're going to do it? And that's where people will say, well, no. And this is scary because the manager has to kind of penetrate the mind of the person that they're managing and find out what they know and how far their knowledge extends. Often, they don't know how they're going to get it done, and you have to help them. First, you have to help them figure out they don't know. Then you have to make that all right. Then you have to work out figuring out how they're going to do it. And then you have to build their confidence and pat them on the fanny and say, it's okay, you're going to do great. I know you're going to be magnificent. Go do it. And they run out onto the field to play, to execute the play you told them about. And God willing, they'll be able to do it. So, wow, there's a lot going on here. You have to know what has to be done. You have to issue the orders that suggest that it's going to get done. You have to do that issuing of orders in a way that doesn't irritate people, doesn't cause them to resist, but doesn't let them off the hook. And then you've got to make sure that they've got the strategy down, they know how they're going to do it, and they will go off and make it happen. That's a lot of stuff that the manager does. I think this last piece could be put under the heading of putting people in shape to do the work. So probably one of the most significant things a manager does is make sure that their team is in shape to do the work. Now, morale would be a big piece of that. We'd say that morale is at the heart of productivity and at the heart of excitement and happiness. So we want to make sure that the team is in shape, that they're ready, they're knowledgeable, they're capable, and that they're happy about going after what they're doing. And all of that fits into the manager's responsibility. Now, let's talk about that final part. How does a manager think? How does a manager behave? How does a manager see things? First, we'd say that the manager forms the strategy. In baseball, you decide who's going to play offense, who's going to play defense, who's going to play which in which game. You have to look at the opponents and figure out what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then you have to figure out how your guys can exploit those strengths and weaknesses. That's going to be a challenge. The manager figures out the batting order and discovers where his strength is and where the weaknesses are and tries to accommodate that in the way they set up the batting order. The manager calls the signals and makes the signals. And all of those little improvisations that happen in the dugout and then get transferred out to the field are the subject of the manager's expertise. So you got to know how to call the signals. You got to get the team to improvise on the spot. Probably the most important thing the manager does is project a winning intention. Imagine a baseball game where the manager went to the showers in the first inning. Well, that's a formula for a losing team. And so a manager has to be present, but is a manager present and sleeping, or is a manager present and awake and committed and projecting the intention to win all the time? Well, of course, that's what a winning manager does. And yet a lot of people, when they get the job in the first place, haven't really thought about it that way. So the manager's got to be present, got to be awake, got to be committed to winning and helping the team maintain that team focus and that winning intention. And probably the last part of this whole responsibility is the responsibility to keep the team focused. Something unexpected happens in the marketplace. Something unexpected happens with the client. Something unexpected happens out there on the field. Somebody gets injured. What does the manager do? He says, okay, we're taking care of that. That player is going to be looked after and the team is going to be making sure that everything goes well. Those of us left have to make sure we win the game. So the manager's job is to keep people focused on winning, to keep them focused on the game at hand. Well, now that's a pretty quick summary, but there's a lot of meat there. Now, I'm anticipating that we're going to have a lot of phone conversations. I'm anticipating we're going to have a lot of signing in and logging out of forum talking about the job of the manager and how it's carried out and how you feel like you might want to grow into that process. So this is not the end of a discussion, but I think the beginning of a career-long discussion. If we were to summarize for a moment and just kind of see if we could tie it into a neat package, we'd say that the manager doesn't do the work of the team. So that's what a manager doesn't do. A manager is responsible for seeing that the work gets done. That's what a manager does. And then the manager becomes the mind of the team. And that's the way a manager thinks. The manager is the thinking part, the emotional part, the focus part of the team. That means becoming the mind of the organization. Now, what does all this mean for you guys? You're new managers. So probably your immediate job is to start learning how to look, how to think, how to see, how to conduct yourself, and how to handle other people as a manager. And this is a skill. Skills can be learned, skills can be acquired, and they can be polished over time. I'm sure as we start this discussion, you're going to be coming up with a long list of people whose management skills you admire. And now, from now on, we hope you'll begin thinking about how to emulate those people that you admire as well. I guess the net of this whole discussion is that a manager's job is not so much about the doing, but equally much about being and thinking and seeing the way a manager thinks and sees. So, welcome to the job of management. We're looking forward to a long and fruitful career. Batter up.